Welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors. Dr. Allen chats with successful investors exploring their journey from setback to triumph. Through this window, we glimpse the truths that inspire our guests to invest abundantly and flourish in all areas of life. And now your host, Dr. Allen.
Hello and welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors, where we delve deep into the lives of our successful guests to learn the secrets of thriving to flourish abundantly in all areas of life. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. My guest today is founder and CEO of Bootstrap Legal, which uses artificial intelligence to help draft real estate syndication legal documents faster and cheaper. She is also the founder and co-organizer of Legal Hackers LA, which programs around the intersection of law and technology. She's been named one of 10 Women to Watch in Legal Technology by the American Bar Association Journal, was named one of 18 Millennials Changing Legal Tech by Law.com, and was a finalist for the Corporate Counsel of the Year Award by Los Angeles Business Journal. She has worked in international regulatory and trade policy at the U.S. Department of Commerce. She was a Presidential Management Fellow at the U.S. Department of State and U.S. Department of Transportation. She holds an LL.M. in Public International Law, a JD, and a BA in Biological Sciences. Impressive indeed. Please welcome the accomplished Amy Wan.
Amy, what I'd like to know is how you became the woman that you became, which is obviously a very incredible woman. So tell us a little bit about your childhood. You might think about a memorable experience from your childhood and start from that point.
Oh gosh. I don't know about any particular memorable experience, but I am obviously Asian. But it's interesting. I was born and raised in Southern California. I've been here pretty much almost my entire life, except for a couple years. And yeah, I think when I was say in middle school, high school, and especially college, it really hit me in the face. Like I really definitely struggled with like cultural identity, racially I'm Chinese, but almost ethnically, I would say I'm Taiwanese. My family was, of the type that escaped China during the Cultural Revolution and ended up in Taiwan. And nationality, I would say I'm obviously American, but there's all these different blends, right? Because I don't feel like I'm Chinese like Chinese people, but I'm not like a lot of my Taiwanese cousins. But I don't think it's as simple to say I'm, like just American, like every average American either, because I guess I don't really think there is an average American.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Like everyone's very unique. Yeah.
So you have cousins still in Taiwan?
Yeah. So I have on my dad's side, I actually have cousins in Northern California, but also in Taiwan. And it's so funny because I feel like a lot of the generation of folks that immigrated to the U.S., they were a lot more ambitious. They were very go-getter, but they also have these very, I would say, very rigid ideas about what you should do in your life and as a career. And so when I was applying to college, like there were only a couple of things you were allowed to do. You could be a doctor, you could be an engineer, you could, go into finance or, software development or something like that. But I remember one of my Taiwanese cousins came to the U.S. to study college, and her mom let her be a psychology major. I was like, what? Like we're allowed to do that? My cousins in Taiwan have tattoos. Like that would not fly with my parents here. They're actually like, I feel like the immigrants are much more conservative.
Really? That's amazing. I would not have expected that. Well, tell us a little bit more about that cultural identity. And how has it shaped your life?
It's in many ways I'm grateful because my parents um, definitely really emphasized education and, achieving a lot of education, right? Which I have certainly done.
Uh-huh.
At the same time, I would say, especially in Asian culture, there's this kind of like be seen but not heard kind of attitude towards kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that has really played a lot into me being an adult, especially in law school. I mean, I went to public school through high school, and yes, I went to USC for undergrad, but I was in the biology courses, and there were 200 people in a classroom, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I always felt fairly anonymous up until law school, where they do the Socratic method and they will call on everyone. And I found that absolutely terrifying.
Mm.
And we actually had to form opinions and reason through those opinions. And it wasn't like, for example, biology, where you could totally skate by just memorizing an entire textbook, which is what I did
Mm.
through the end of college, So I think I really had to kind of reverse engineer a lot of cultural things, to think critically as opposed to sitting there and memorizing stuff, but also just even in socializing and getting to understand like, oh, people value what you have to say. Like you shouldn't just be quiet. And that is something I'm still continuing uh, to kind of undo every day. It takes a lot,
Mm-hmm.
it's if you're brought up with it every day,
Yeah,
it's
just
something I really have to unlearn.
just really enmeshed in that culture of be seen and not heard, and then here you are in the legal profession where you have to be heard. That's part of being in the legal profession. That has to be a big leap. Um, how did you manage that leap? What all did you have to go through to make that leap?
I mean, I would say that, once one gets to university, they kind of look around and say, hey, what are the other successful people doing, right? And it's so funny, like, in Asian culture, it's all about humility. Even if you have something to brag about, you don't necessarily brag about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would see these business majors walk across campus, and they hadn't accomplished a single thing in their life, and yet they were pounding their chest like, I'm going to be the next billionaire. And I was like, wow, these people really have uh you know something there. And while I would not be the first person to sit there and pound my chest and brag about everything, um, it's really taught me to not understate myself, right? To put more value in myself. And there's obviously positives and negatives to Asian and Western culture. And, I think a lot of Asians who grow up in the US, they have to find a way to balance the two that makes sense for them.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's not easy. And I mean, it's I find that I can somewhat relate to what you're talking about because I just by nature am such an introvert, and even though I am of European descent and therefore in the majority of the population here in the United States, I also came from a cultural background where you were supposed to be seen and not heard, and I was a very conservative background, and I find a lot. I can relate to a lot of what you're talking about. It just is not easy to put myself out there. I still struggle with that, even at my advanced age here. It's just not something you just automatically get over.
It's funny though, right? Like American culture, I think really unlike any other culture in the world, even unlike European culture, it's, he or she who is the loudest is
Mm-hmm.
heard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And social
Right.
media has made everyone have very much a democratic voice, even
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
even if they don't necessarily deserve it.
Even if they know nothing, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember when I did my master's of law over at LSE, London School of Economics, and my classmates from other countries would come up to me and they're like, "Why is it that in the U.S., like, even the crazy people have a voice?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't quite know how to explain it, but."
Yeah.
I mean, that's a positive and negative of all our culture here is truly everyone has a voice.
Yeah. Whether they deserve it or not. Yes, indeed. So I guess I'm assuming here you're bilingual. Is that correct?
Kind of.
Kind of.
I have an older brother,
Mm.
and when he was in elementary school, they had put him, in the, English as a second language ESL program. And
Mm-hmm.
my parents were not happy about that. So they kind of straight up just stopped speaking Mandarin at home.
Oh.
And, I understand conversational Chinese, but I certainly can't have a business conversation. I can read and write, but like
Mm-hmm.
like second grade elementary level, So I would not say my Mandarin's that strong. English is definitely my native
It's
language.
it's yeah. The Oriental languages are so different. It's not like learning French or German or Italian or something, because there's so much interrelated there. But Chinese is very different language. But that is interesting. Your parents um, just stopped talking at home in their native language. Um, that is, I think, in and of itself amazing. Um, did they speak English before coming to the States?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm actually not sure. I think my mom probably did because she grew up in Singapore.
Mm.
I don't know about my dad, but I've gone through old photo albums of, like the first month my dad was in the US. He came to do his master's of engineering at Texas Tech, and it's so funny because he immigrated in like the late 70s or early 80s, and it's like a picture of him in front of a JC Penney because that's the first time he ever saw a department store, or like
Oh,
him with
wow.
these two random black kids because he had never seen black people before, and he would tell me these stories of like, um, like he would go to the school cafeteria and they would drink so much milk because it was just there and they had never seen such a abundance before.
Hmm.
So it's really funny the stories you hear.
Yeah, I guess so. Um, so I also spent a little bit of time at Texas Tech as well, back in the early '70s. I actually got my degree from Lubbock Christian, which is a small Christian university there in Lubbock, Texas, where Texas Tech is at. So yeah, familiar with that neck of the country as well. Well, thinking back on your childhood, um, and what are some of the things that, if you could go back and change them, what would you change about your childhood?
I don't really think I would change much. I was actually talking about this with my husband this weekend. Uh, I think my parents did everything that they possibly could do to provide as much as they could for us, and they certainly underwent through a lot of sacrifice. Um, I think in particular, my mom was really tough on me when, especially when I was a teenager, right? And we certainly had many, many arguments back then. But there were a couple things that I am grateful for, right? They always wanted me to have some sort of technical skill under my belt, which is why I have the biology degree, because they thought, hey, if everything else fails with you, at least you can still go to like pharmacy school or med school, which obviously I haven't. But I think because I wasn't just pre-law through college, and I have different perspectives on things. I think that has helped shape how I see the world every day, especially now in COVID-19. Everyone seems to think that they're an epidemiology expert, and I'm like, I don't think that's the way science works, But there were certainly a lot of battles when I was a teenager, and I realized that because I went through that with my parents and my mom in particular, I think it's really made me a much stronger person. I'm told I'm pretty tough, and I really do think nowadays that adversity builds strength of character, right? So, sure, I've gone through a lot of unpleasant experiences, but it's shaped me, and I've learned from each one of them.
You certainly have. You have done some amazing things. For those just tuning in, my guest today is Amy Wan, and she is the founder and CEO of Bootstrap Legal. So one question I have here, Amy, is you were conditioned and actually set up to go into the medical field or something other like that, probably anything and everything but law. So how is it that you broke that mold essentially, and you ended up in law, and not only ended up in law, but ended up being very, very successful in that field?
I think there were a couple of different like formative events in my, I guess, teenage or early 20s. Up until I was going to college, what I had always heard was, hey, study hard so that you can get into a good college so that you can go get a good job. And I always thought of myself as a career woman. And strangely, the last year, my senior year of high school, the rhetoric suddenly became study hard so you can go to a good college and meet a good man to marry. And I was like, what? Like, wait, what happened there, And I remember like my parents sent me to like this SAT tutoring thing in high school, and the teacher was Korean American. And he literally sat at the front of the class and talked about the 3 C's: cooking, cleaning, and childbearing for women. I'm like, what in the
Really?
world? I was so mad, right?
Yeah.
And so by the time college admissions actually rolled around, I got into a lot of great schools, and my dream school was Pomona College. It's this tiny liberal arts school in Southern California, and I just went to campus. I fell in love, but they didn't offer me any sort of scholarship or anything. And USC basically was, I got full ride from like UCI. I got a lot of scholarships from other universities. USC was throwing money at me, and my parents were like, "You're going to USC?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? That's..." I know this
Yeah.
sounds like arrogant, but like, I was like, "That's the lowest ranking school I got into." And they were like, "No, we're filling out the statement of intent, and you're going to go there in the fall." And I was so mad
Yeah, I can
because
imagine. Yeah.
I thought I had worked so hard, right?
Yeah.
And what they said to me was, your money, your decision. Our money, our decision. Up until that point, we had never talked about money, right? It was,
Yeah.
I thought it was implicit. Like they had always told me, don't worry, we're going to pay for your college. And it was really a wake up call for me. So after that, I was determined to become as financially independent as I possibly could. So, most of the pre-meds, they just spent every day in the library studying, or if they had extra time partying. I worked. I led like double lives, which is probably why I was chronically sick in college. So I would,
Yeah.
do all the pre-med, the bio courses and everything. And then I was also heavily into extracurriculars because I thought, how am I going to pursue the things I actually want to pursue? But I also actually had like jobs tutoring rich kids, right? So I remember, I think it was my second summer, I think my sophomore year as a college student, I got into this program where I was going to I had a choice between like Nepal or Ghana to go do like a medical internship. And so I told my parents this is what I was going to do. And they're like, no, you can't do this. And I was like, yes, I can. My money, my decision. And then after that, they just like, they learned that they really couldn't tell me what to do anymore because I was making my own money now. So it's forced me to become super independent, but also, much more financially savvy, which, has helped in adulthood, obviously.
Sure. So how did that lead you to the legal profession?
So, I ended up choosing going to Ghana that summer. And interestingly, in Ghana, healthcare workers, so doctors and nurses, are actually paid by the government. The government doesn't really have money. And so there were a number of healthcare strikes going on at that time. So I went into the hospital to volunteer as a medical intern. And half the staff was on strike, and there were literally people dying in the streets. And on one hand, in actually helping with patients, I realized I did not like it at all. I remember there was, one patient who, like an entire part of his body had been consumed by man-eating bacteria. And we basically had to pour like ethanol alcohol on it, and it would have been really painful. And every time he winced, I winced. And the nurse was like, you can't do that. And I was like, I can't not feel this guy's pain, right? In certain ways, I was too empathetic. And so I found out that part of me on the medical side, but I just kind of looked at the situation as a whole. And that summer made me realize, doctors may heal people's bodies and priests may heal people's souls, but the situation that they were in was a political situation. And who is supposed to help out the people with the random situations they find themselves in life? So after I went back, I started, trying to hang out with the pre-law kids to kind of figure out what they were doing. And, I think I've always just been very justice oriented. I've always kind of lived very much according to my own moral compass. And so law spoke to me in that sense.
I like that. I like that decision that actually came from a deep sense of yourself and a deep sense of right and wrong and justice. I like that. We're coming to the end of our time together, and we're just now getting started. I've got one more question before we go into that. Just another break here. Today we're with Amy Wong, and she is the founder and CEO of Bootstrap Legal. and many other wonderful things. So, Amy, tell the folks here how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn and all the other social media networks, but the company website is bootstraplegal.com, and the affiliate law firm of Bootstrap Legal is jobsactlawyer.com.
Okay. My last question is and I ask all my guests this, when you come to your end of your journey in this life, what would you like your epitaph to read?
Oh, wow. I definitely wanted to say that I was a mother and a wife and a daughter and a friend. But also that, I was always trying to challenge myself and trying to challenge myself and see what my limits truly were.
It's a beautiful epitaph. It's just been a delight, Amy, and I hope we can have some future conversations because we are truly just getting started here, and I would love to know you a whole lot better. So thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors, brought to you by Steed Talker Capital. Steed Talker Capital works with both new and established investors nationwide, creating opportunities to flourish in all areas of life. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steed Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steed Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures great and small flourish abundantly. For resources to enhance your well-being through multifamily real estate investment, connect with us online at capital.steedtalker.com.